Hello everyone, welcome back. It's a sunny, snowy day, but sunny here in Kitchener. I hope you have some sun where you are. Gosh, it makes it so much better. I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of snowbanks, and I know our colleagues up north, and I mean northern Ontario, not just north of Kitchener, have got a lot more snow than us, and the bitter cold temperatures seem to be everywhere in Ontario. So welcome back. We're glad that you joined us again. Just as a reminder, we're in part C. We're in the second webinar of 3, and we're focusing today on introducing the complexity scale, sort of getting, last time in parts B and A and B, we went over, what's it all about, what are task sets, what was the characteristics of a good document, how to find them. Now we're going to start to get into how to actually make tasks, what do I consider first, the complexity scale. And just as a quick reminder, this is where we're headed as far as what we hope you come out with as far as new understandings and abilities to create task sets that are authentic to whatever the 5 pathways that you're working in, whether that's an independence pathway, post-secondary, apprenticeship, employment, or secondary school credits. So we're going to have a quiz first. So I know Karen's got the poll already. So, number 1, what do you think? What is the definition of a level 1 task? Is it A, B, or C? Welcome to anybody that's just coming in now. We're just doing our first question. Do we have most of the answers, Karen?
Yep, we're at 78%. So I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we had part A, 7%, answer B, 7%, answer C, 86%.
Yeah, it's C, locating one piece of information at a time. It's that locate sort of lowest level. Excellent, great. Okay, let's go on to number 2. What does TOM stand for? Type of match, typical open match, type of method. Which one is it, A, B, or C? I know you guys were a group of fast voters last time. I wonder if you're this fast again.
They are. We're at 83% already. Okay, we're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So we had answer A, 63%, answer B, 6%, and answer C, 31%.
It's the first one. It's type of match, A. That's what TOM stands for, other than Tom Cruise, Tom Green, and all the other Toms I said in the previous webinar. It's type of match, and that's about the cognitive processing. Okay, number 3. True or false? A task set is defined as a set of questions that replicate an authentic experience that a learner will have in any of the 5 pathways. Is that true or false?
You're at 89% already. You guys rock. 100%. Excellent. Okay, we had 89% say true and 11% said false.
It's true. A task set is a set of questions replicating an authentic experience. Absolutely, it's true. Okay, number 4. True or false? Good samples of authentic documents are bilingual on the same page, well-designed, and visually interesting, and can be used to create many tasks. Are good samples all of those things? True or false? Are those all characteristics of good documents?
89%. So I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. We had 18% say true and 82% said false.
It is false. There was a little bit of a hang up there. Bilingual on the same page is not on the list of sort of good characteristics of a good authentic document. It's better to have one language on one page. It's great when you can find documents that, especially if you have both French and English learners, it's great if you can find documents that come in more than one language, but ideally it's not on the same exact page. So that's why this statement is false. The other descriptors are certainly descriptors of a good authentic document. So hopefully that reminded you of that information that we went over in our previous webinar. So that's great. Okay, so if you haven't heard this before, I think I skipped one, Part C agenda, here we are. Got a little ahead of myself. We're going to be dialing it up to 11. For those of you that are old enough, like me, to have watched This Is Spinal Tap a little bit more, he was always talking about turning it up to 11 on his speaker. And no, as I said, my lame joke from the previous webinar, Tom and Tori are not movie stars. Well, they are, but not in this case. So we're going to focus in on sort of introducing these things, reminding you of some things we've introduced in Webinar 1. In Webinar 3, we're going to really delve into complexity, but we're just going to start to get into it today. Rule of thumb. This is probably the most important rule of thumb I can give you, other than do not start an authentic task with let's pretend. That was my key rule of thumb in the first webinar. This one is you level the task, not the document. And I'm sure I mentioned it last Thursday when we were together. Tasks have the levels and complexities and skills domain described to them. Authentic documents don't. They are inherently going to have all kinds of sort of tasks involved with them. And so you can control the complexity of the task. You can't control the complexity that's inherent in the document. And really, people often say, gee, I've got this document, but I have really low level 1 learners. I can't give them the document the way it is. But let's think about that for a moment. If the document is the way they're going to see it on the job or in the classroom or wherever that document is from, then you need to show them what that authentic, real document looks like. What we need to do is help them hone their skills to be able to deal with that document. So you can control the level of the tasks or questions that go with that. So in that case, you may create tasks that are all in sort of the level 1 range. Not that they all stay at the very basic level, but that they stay within a closer, tighter range of skill level. So it's okay to use more complex documents with people whose skill levels maybe aren't there yet, but we want to show them the authentic thing and help them learn to use it. Because that gets into the application of skills. We don't want to leave them back at only skills practice. We need to help them move on to how do I apply those with unfamiliar documents and unfamiliar circumstances. So level the task, not the document. And that's why we often say you don't alter the document. Okay, just a reminder of the 3 steps. And of course, we're focused on step 2 today, which is all about developing pathway-focused learning activities. So in the case of apprenticeship and worker-focused tasks, and I'm talking about the on-the-job part of apprenticeship versus the in-school portion of apprenticeship. Again, this is a reminder, we talked a bit about this in the first webinar, but certainly it's the worker's job to complete a series of tasks or questions on the job. So the things that we make up need to replicate that authentic experience, such as enter information on a form, check dates or times on a schedule, look for information in a health and safety manual, look up information on how to operate a certain piece of equipment or machinery, or rules or regulations or policies that have to do with their job. Student-focused tasks in the academic pathways. Again, that could be the in-school portion of apprenticeship, or it could be a course. The most obvious ones are post-secondary programs and secondary school credits. And again, you want to do authentic things. These are the ones that most closely resemble skill building activities, because certainly academic situations are very much focused on skill building activities. So here's some examples: write a paper, take notes, study for exam or test. Developing independence tasks. It's real life. There's no end, and I would say this is probably one of the pathways people are most familiar with, because really you're looking at such a variety of life tasks within the variety of life roles. Parent, caregiver, member of a church or synagogue, a mentor, a coach, somebody taking care of their elderly parent or the young children. So any number of things that they encounter in quote-unquote real life could form the basis for an independence task. But either way, it's asking yourself, and I still do this when I make task sets, does the worker do this on the job? Would this be something they'd actually do on the job? So knowing a bit about the job, knowing a little bit more about, the post-secondary class or the secondary school credit task gives me more information as a practitioner that I can realistically answer this. Would this adult do this task in real life in whatever role that we just mentioned in the previous slide? So knowing about those roles, what's realistic, let's say, for a soccer coach to deal with, is really helpful to answering these questions. And this is a question that you would ask yourselves as practitioners as you're creating tasks. As we mentioned before, there's 3 parts to a task set. There's the actual tasks or questions, the authentic document, and then the purpose for learning or instructional focus. And of course, for our framework, that would be the OALCF competencies and the pathways. And of course, where do you start? Well, there's some flexibility there. You can start with the document. You can think about the pathway. Here's some suggestions on how you do that. And as I mentioned before, we touched on this a bit in webinar 1. Did the learner bring in the document? In the pathway thing, what's the local labor market information telling you? What are the jobs that are in demand? What are ones that are attainable for learners? Are there popular learner pathways that you find in your program, in your community? Then you find the authentic documents or authentic scenarios or situations. So you can start from either end. Jane and I have discussed this many times, like what is our actual process when we sit down to sort of create tasks and think about the OALCF? Well, more often or not, we're looking at a document. Whether we got that because we thought of a pathway and then got the document, or found the document and then thought of the pathway, doesn't really matter. But at some point, we're sitting down with the document and we're literally just starting to draft. We're seeing what tasks are coming up. We're thinking of those. They may not be in the correct order of complexity yet. They'll probably not be our final wording of tasks, but we're starting to generate them and write them down as we're looking at the document. Then we look at each task and start to pull apart what are the OALCF competencies and the levels of those in each task. So it's doing some analysis, and you may find you have to reword things so that you can be clear about what level of competency you're working with. And remember, tasks are have integrated skills in them. So it's never just one task it's never just one OALCF competency and level for a task. They're integrated. And so, but there may be an OALCF competency that dominates, that is the primary one that somebody's working on. And then you may work out from there and say, okay, it's math, and so I'm going to work out from there and see what other OALCF competencies are involved in that. And then we think about the scaffolding. Okay, let's say I've created 7 questions. Then I'm going to start looking at them and going, do I still like the wording? Is it the best wording I can come up with? I check back on my, and we've got a handout that we sent you about question words and Tori. I'll check on that. Have I used the right question words? Am I specific in my questions? Then I'm going to say, okay, and is my first question the easiest one? What kind of range of questions do I want to include in this task set? So then I'll start arranging them or even revising them so that I'm making them go from the easiest to the most difficult. So, and you revise as needed. Jane, did you want to add anything to that process that we tend to follow?
No, because it's really, yeah, it's really exactly what you said, Anne. Like, I think everybody, once you get familiar with it, folks, you're going to come with your own way of doing it. But yeah, I agree with Anne. It's exactly how I approach it.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little kind of finagling around, but either way, you get down to work by looking at the document and starting to just brainstorm questions or tasks. And of course, I always have my curriculum framework from my LCF handy, and there's more information in the practitioner guide as well about this, and that's the practitioner guide for these webinars.
Okay. We do have a question that just popped up, Anne.
Oh, great.
Okay, and the question is, for the purposes of CAMS and learner plans, is the dominant activity used in an integrated task set?
Sorry, I think I'm not understanding it, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this person who wrote that question would be able to clarify it just a little bit, because I'm not quite sure of what information you're looking for either.
As far as I know, this can be put down as learning activities. I think people need to know that we as networks are not allowed into the EOIS because we will play with it and change everybody's numbers. We are untrustworthy. Because we have nothing better to do, and I'm telling you that as a fact. But we have to make estimates on this, and if you're talking about how can you use these, as far as I know, you can put them in under learning activities, if that makes sense to people.
Yeah, I thought there was somewhere in the learner plan in the OIS that you can list learning activities, since it's, of course, doesn't fall into being a milestone or culminating task. Is that making sense at all?
Yeah, I haven't got anything. Okay, yes, and someone else has answered, yes, they can be entered under learning activities or custom plans. Yeah, CAMS requires us to record tasks in one location. It'll be too much paperwork to try and record all the integrated tasks and learning activities. So, and a couple other people are saying these are considered learning activities and they go on the training plans as such.
Yeah. Okay, so if there are more questions about that, by all means post them up. I should have reiterated today. Definitely, if people have questions, whenever you think of them, post them up on the question window, and Karen will stop us and we'll address those right away. Not a problem. Okay. Are we okay to move on, Karen?
Yeah, I just have one more comment. There's not enough time to record all elements of the integrated tasks.
Yeah, that was my understanding from what we hear from practitioners as well. So maybe it's, recording sort of the dominant competency that they're working on for that particular task, but it would be hard to capture all of them and put that into EOIS CAMS. I mean, it's good for you to know and have on, when you look at hopefully you've had a chance to look at the Quill portal, and when you look at those tasks and you look at what competencies, you'll see a whole raft of competencies associated with the tasks, and that gives you the background information as a practitioner that's quite helpful. Okay, so we'll move on to two parts of a question. Gee, my little forward button's going a little too fast today. So there's as we were mentioned, there's two parts to a question. There's the information given type of match, and the response requested, which is a type of requested information, or TORI. You know, for example, the given in the question example below, the given is driver needs something in the vehicle. And the response or response requested is item needed before leaving the yard. So you can always break the question into two parts. And this is a helpful strategy to use for yourself to analyze your own tasks and how you've written them, but also for learners to start to break tasks down. Okay. So you want to develop a variety of who, what, where, and how tasks. And in fact, if you have a look at the handout, I'm going to draw your attention to the question, words, and Tori handout. I hope you have that handy beside you, because it provides an overview of different key question words, and which will help you with the next few slides, which is all about wording of tasks, and how they can be used and how easy or challenging they are. So I'm looking at the question words and Tori handout. And you'll notice on the right-hand side there are numbers. These are percentages. So the average correct response to a who question, learners get that right 97% of the time. Whereas when you look at a which question, which is about criteria, they get those correct 63% of the time. So you can see how each of the specific question words moves from easy up to challenging, or easy up to more difficult. Interesting how what is the most difficult to answer, because we often use what, and we'll get into this more in the third webinar, we often use what all over the place. And it almost becomes ambiguous as to what exactly we are looking for. So that's another thing to think about when you're wording your tasks. You may use what as the key question word, but is that the most appropriate? Should it be how much, when, where, these types of question words? So a helpful handout for you and something to keep handy. Okay, here's some key, just like we went over the key attributes of a good authentic task, we're going to go over sort of best practices in wording tasks. And you should also have a handout, the task writing checklist. Many of these key points are captured in that handout that was sent to you by email. So that's the task writing checklist. So definitely dig it out and see how it compares to the slides here. So the important thing is to use the active voice rather than passive. So in this case, we've got the example of what product number does the clerk enter into the computer, which is the active we're having. And of course, active voice is when the subject does the action to the object, rather than having the object come first in the sentence. And the object, comes first in the sentence. What else do I want to say about this? I feel like I'm on a little train and I've gotten derailed. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, let's move on to avoid gender and racial stereotypes. It'll come back to me. Naming the occupation using the linesman, the hydro linesman, or the wait staff person, the front desk clerk, rather than using he or she, because we don't know which gender might have that job. We shouldn't traditionalize jobs, or even for that matter training situations, whether they're going to post-secondary programs that were in the past more traditionally female than male. We want to stay away from any kind of racial stereotyping in our wording of tasks. Also, to avoid localized jargon, meaning don't put in a question that people would have to have prior knowledge about in order to figure out. Let's say you were referencing some geographic place in your town. Well, they went over to Herbie's and purchased hamburgers. Well, I could probably surmise that Herbie's is some sort of restaurant, but I don't know if it's a drive-through. Is it a deli? Is it a family restaurant? What is it? You don't want things that take prior knowledge. And of course, breaking this is simple, breaking longer questions into several sentences. Make it biteable information instead of very long-winded. Because certainly we know that reading is an important underlying skill to being able to answer the questions. And if you know that your students are at a reading level where reading long sentences is quite challenging, then breaking it into biteable sentences, that's also good for more accomplished readers. They can scan and read the information more quickly. Okay, avoid questions that require just yes or no, or encourage guessing. You know, tasks on the job rarely have multiple choice options. Now, tasks in post-secondary might in fact have multiple choice. So again, it may depend on the pathway. But you certainly want to stay away from things that have simplistic yes-no answers. You want, even in a locate question, having them locate a particular word or information is better than just saying, you know, a yes-no question. Use words that match the level of the activity. This is getting back to the question words and Tori handout, insofar as, you know, which question word, how complicated is it, and are you clear about the one that you're using? And just as a summary, we're seeing how some suit high level and some suit lower level. Okay, we're going to do an activity. So I hope you got, I know this particular webinar number 2 of the series, we're handout intensive. But please get out exercise 2, the task worksheet, and you should also have the, it's just, this one is just 1 page, sorry. The next activity is 2 pages. So get out that worksheet, exercise 2, worker focused tasks worksheet. And please compare the questions on the left-hand column to the ones on the right-hand column. Which are worker focused? And if and why are they more worker focused on the right-hand side than the left-hand side? And in this case, because we look at all 5 pathways, are there some in the left-hand column that have a different focus? And can you think about what that focus might be? Is it post-secondary? Is it secondary school credit? This type of thing. So could you take 5 minutes to complete that? So let's take a look at those. So we're just going to walk through these. I'm going to give you some information. And okay, answers. So we're at the, just want to make sure I did I pop? No, it's jumped ahead again. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, and 3. So a worker needs to know the purpose of the form. So more than really just the title of the form. And more often a worker uses a form that he or she is familiar with and has placed in a convenient location. So finding the title is not really necessary. However, the worker needs to know the purpose of the form. Also understanding why the worker uses the form helps the learner understand the background of the learning activity. So that's why on the right-hand side, purpose, the question, what is the purpose for this form, is more worker focused. And certainly though, if you were looking at what is the title of this document, I could see that if you were trying to orient a low-level learner to a workplace document. That might be more closer to a skill-building activity. Okay, number 2. Generally, it's more likely that the learner will use the form, be filling it out for another individual rather than just reading about the allergies. So in this case, we've got worker focused as being highlight, underline, or circle the section of the form where the secretary enters the information about the student's allergies. That's more applicable for its use in a workplace. Number 3, the difference is consider why the worker is reading the guidelines. Why would he or she want to know what object is 50 feet away? It's more likely that the worker wants to know about the location of the construction sheds and their distance from the other buildings to ensure safety, because it's more likely that they're actually putting up the shed or maybe responsible for having it placed in the correct area. So that's why where should the construction sheds be located. Jane, did you have anything else you want to mention about 1 to 3?
Yeah, wait a minute. Now I have to have the form open again.
Sorry.
We go on that.
I was
Because when you go back and forth, I don't have it. No, I think you've covered that one. Yeah, nope, that's good.
What do you think about the identify what must be 50 feet from the main building? Do you think that's more academic in flavor in number 3?
Well, I know we had a person last time that said it was, and I mean, I think it's the fact that that could possibly be something that would be considered under secondary school credits or post-secondary, because they're, even if they are taking somebody through the employment path, they're not focused in the same way. So it'd be kind of interesting to know, is there any way, can we find out what people think? Do they think that that does have an academic flavor to it?
So that's number 3. Identify on the right hand, on the left-hand side column, number 3, identify what must be 50 feet from the main building. Do you see that as an appropriate academic based? I'm not sure about the verb identify. Maybe I think it'd be a better question if it was how many feet away from the main building must the shed be?
I agree with you, and that makes it more academic. But it actually, that one can even make it both ways. It's the way you ask the question. It's a tough one. A lot of times I've had people, we've even been, when we've reviewed questions and tasks, somebody goes, one person will go, well, that's not authentic to the job, and the next person will go, that is authentic to the job. So there is some fine lines there, but when you go into the academic thing, you have to think about, they're going to be running into questions on tests that are written not in the format that we're talking about. So they're going to have, for lack of a better term, poorly written questions.
So do we have any questions about numbers 1 to 3, or can we go on to the answers 4, 5, 6? Anybody got questions, Karen?
Just a couple of comments are coming up.
Oh, great.
It might be used to emphasize the separation of certain buildings on a job site, like gas tanks away from the building. Another comment is identify is a term that's used for comprehension.
So yeah, so that might be more in the academic realm. So that wording may be more if you're creating tasks for the academic path. So that's good to know.
Yeah, and a couple of other comments, and it goes back to some of the comments that we've always had when we've done this exercise, is it makes it really difficult when we don't have the actual authentic document to go with, like to see exactly why something is work-related or not.
Yeah, no, that's true. It would be ideal to be able to see them. Okay, we'll move on to 4, 5, and 6. So as you can see, with 4, the task should be authentic. So why would the worker need to know the total weight of the truck? Or the total weight, how much do the stereos weigh? Frame the task to give more background on the worker's situation. So that's why the right-hand column, which reads, drivers need to comply with weight restrictions. The truck weighs X kilograms without a load. Calculate the gross vehicle weight. Now, this is the one question that people were sort of saying, the wording on the left-hand side was much more academic in flavor. A truck driver's load of televisions and stereos weighs 1,500 kilograms. The televisions weigh 750 kilograms. How much do the stereos weigh? That would be something typical in secondary school credits. So people felt like, well, this wording would be okay if we were going down that pathway, but not so good. The other wording would be better if we were trying to do an employment-focused tasks. Okay, number 5. This was the right-hand column. It read, what policy number does the clerk enter into the computer? Learners completing the task may confuse the worker's task with themselves as workers, you. So they're saying use the clerk instead of you. Now, mind you, If you were referring to, let's say, an independence task where they had to enter maybe their medical coverage policy number, then you might be appropriate. So you can see how when you compare and contrast the wording to questions, you can see how one lends itself more to the employment pathways or lends itself more to the academic pathways, which is helpful for you as practitioners being able to create different task wordings. So last but not least, we get to the one about the wine. The question needs to be framed as a work task. In this case, the server needs to find the area of the product label that has the required information. Locating the information, not the content, is important. But certainly I'd say, you know, while the right-hand side about servers are sometimes asked to describe taste of wine, so highlight where they'd find that description is worker-focused. I can certainly see that maybe in an independence situation, name the 5 flavors that are embodied in this taste of wine, or might be something that would be in that type of task. Any questions about these?
Yeah. I just wanted to add that in those ones, the secondary schools credits or post-secondary would fit. You can use you for those ones too, because that is the person. That's what they're going to be doing. They're a student. They're a learner. It's really the employment pathway that I don't use you, and this is where it's confusing for apprenticeship, because apprenticeship, yes, they're going to be doing the job, but they also have to be going to school. So in that case, I still would refer to it like it's an employment pathway. So try to leave the you out of it, if at all possible. And like Ann said, those even the number 6 would fit. The first column one would, the left column would fit for any of the academic pathways.
Okay, Karen, are there any questions that we should address before we move on?
No, we haven't had any questions pop up. Oh, here we go. One suggestion was if you're doing secondary and post-secondary activities, instead of saying you can use the term the student.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Okay, so we'll move on. Thanks for that suggestion. That was a good one. Okay, so Tori, type of requested information. As we mentioned before, Tori's got 2 parts. It's got the given information contained in the question that is helpful in finding the answer, and then the requested information. In other words, what answer are they looking for? What do they have to search the document for? And as we mentioned before about the handout that you got on question words and Tori, and what are more complicated question words and what are less complicated ones. But identifying the type of requested information is key to successfully answering the question. And so you need to take the time to identify the Tori increases the learner's comprehension of the task and ultimately the performance of the task. So what it's saying is basically taking your time to take a look at it from the learner's point of view and helping them also identify the given and requested information. So this becomes a strategy that they can use when approaching questions, as much as it's a strategy for you to create questions. Have you put in given information? Are you clear about what's being requested in your task wording? And a reminder about Tom, that's type of match. So remember back on the Mosenthal taxonomy, sort of the graph, it talks about type of match being the basic cognitive processing. And of course, this locate cycle is in the easy or, levels, OLCF levels 1 and 2. And of course, integrate is OLCF level 3. And then generate, which is the highest level of cognitive processing or matching, is above OALCF levels. It's in the levels Essential Skills or International Adult Literacy Survey level of difficult, or 4 or 5. And the other thing about considering type of match or the cognitive processing that they need to do with when answering a question is so that you can carefully sort of create your question set from easy to hard. So you have to keep this in mind every time I draft a question. I ask myself, what are they doing in there? Are they locating? Do they have to cycle? Is this an integrate? Am I moving them up too fast into integrate questions? And then I'd also think about the learners that I'm trying to work with. You know, is this too fast a progression or just right? Excuse me. So as I said, we're focusing on instructional focus and complexity and introducing that. The whole thing of scaffolding. You heard us mention this before. And remember, scaffolding is bringing somebody from sort of their zone or comfort zone of, I know this stuff, I have enough skills and knowledge to deal with it, to moving them to the edge of that zone and even beyond that. That's what scaffolding is about. So pushing them to deal with integrated tasks that are more and more challenging. And obviously this enables you to see where they're at with their skills and knowledge. You know, what tasks did they accomplish really well, successfully? What did they have difficulties with? What could they do with help? That then enables you to come back around and do skill building activities with them so that they can then attempt the integrated tasks once more, the application of learning, and see if they're more successful at answering the task set. And it's always important to start with an initial task or question that orients the learner to the document. So it starts off with usually bringing them into the top part of the top half of the document. Then follow that up with tasks that increase in complexity, as I was just describing, because as I mentioned before, you're trying to move them up within the hierarchy of cognitive processing. So the more thinking involved, the more difficult the question. And just as a reminder, we've got the LCIG there. So types of responses. Certainly you want to be, again, similar to what's happening in the job, academic setting, or real life. So whether that's calculating, entering, highlighting, circling, explain or discuss. So all of these, and some of these are easier than explain or discuss is obviously more of an integrate, while entering information on a form or highlighting and circling is more of a locate type of task. So you want to be clear about the underlying complexity in each of your questions. That's what the control is about, being very cognizant of how you're designing your question wording. It seems a bit anal retentive, and remember I said at the beginning of webinar 1, we're going to slow down to speed up. Eventually you'll be doing this without thinking. I mean, you will have done your learning, so you can apply this very quickly. But certainly slowing down to think about how you're wording the questions and then how you're ordering your various questions or tasks in your task set is important. That's where you get the control, as well as some other information we'll give you in webinar 3. So low-level activities, as we said, finds or locates keywords in the question and matches those to the same words that are in the document. So remember we were talking about the given information and then requested. So it's great when the given information in the question looks exactly or is the same exact phrase or wording that they can find in the document. Then they're doing a scan for that wording in the document. And again, it's important that in a low-level activity, you keep in mind that they don't need to have a strong understanding of the whole document format in order to find the answer. So they don't have to have intimate knowledge of how graphs work or tables or the layout of a business report in order to find the information if you're doing low-level activities. We've got some examples.
Can I just give a quick one there? Is if anybody has done the measure up or the TOWS, how about the TOWS pretest? where there's this thing talking about a spigot, and you have to answer questions on this spigot piece. And we can answer the questions. And for you, actually, I did that thing for a couple of years, and maybe it's being living in Kitchener, but I thought it was to deal with beer. And then eventually somebody told me, oh no, that's for a coffee machine. And I had no idea, but I could certainly answer all those questions. So that's the whole point of something like this, is the fact that you really don't have to have that knowledge. Even though sometimes you'll look at a document and it looks scary, there's pieces that you can do, and you really don't have to know what that document does.
That's a good point. It shows how, you had different background information about a spigot, more beer related, and yet, like you say, because the way they've worded the question, you were still able to, use the given information in the question and find it in the document. So higher level activities. And this, of course, is when they're cycling or even integrating several pieces of information to find the answer. And certainly at the highest level, generating completely new information, which is usually beyond the OLCF levels, is something obviously at the highest levels. Because remember, we're doing locate, cycle, integrate, generate. So higher level activities involve integrating information, locating, and also the underlying two stages where you're locating several times, which is cycling, and then because you got to locate the information the multiple pieces of information to then integrate it to come up with the answer. Or they've got to compare information from different areas of the same document. That is challenging. Where let's say it's a legal size document or even a 2-pager, and they've got to, and it's maybe all prose, all text, and they've got to look at different areas, bring all that information together in order to choose to come up with the correct answer. Now in numeracy tasks, tasks are easier. So here's some tips about when tasks are easier. When the numbers to be used are obvious, the task is more difficult if the reader has to look for those values. Obviously, if you're having to locate several times and then figure out, is that the correct number to use? If the numbers appear in a row or a column format rather than random, let's say in a prose or a heavy text document. That the operations are explicitly signaled by the use of symbols, meaning it's obvious what they're asking the learner to do, adding together, multiplying, subtracting, whatever. If the operation is signaled by the use of relational statements, how much, what amount, calculate the difference, then it becomes more difficult because it's not as obvious. We're moving up in the difficulty, not as obvious as the previous point where it was clearly stated, add this, subtract this, multiply this, or even the mathematical symbol is given. So when you move up to more of a descriptor, or as they call them, the relational statements, it's getting a little bit more complicated. When these operations are indirect or implied, what is the net profit? It becomes even more difficult. What's the discounted price? Well, that implies some background knowledge. They've got to know what net profit means or discounted price. That involves taking a percentage off the total price. So you can see how we're moving up in complexity here. Jane, you're great at numeracy. Anything? I've got one more page, but anything you want to add at this point? Or you want to wait till the next slide?
I better see the next slide just in case I,
There we go. So quantitative tasks are more difficult when they have to work with ratios. Now, I know you've got something to say about ratios.
I do. Okay, this does take it a little bit further. What I always try to tell people first before I even talk about ratios is if you're looking at a level 1 task, this is where it starts to get more difficult because we're talking about dealing with one piece of information. And when I'm talking about math, I'm talking about you're dealing with one application. So it could be a level 1 task would be adding together many numbers. You could add like 4 or 5 numbers together, and that would still be a level 1 task. It's when you change the computation. So if it was adding numbers together and then subtracting, then you start to add in that higher level and you make it into a level 2. And then from there it starts to make much more sense. But math is a little bit more difficult when it comes to leveling things. But ratios, you have to be very cautious with ratios, because a lot of times people think they're dealing with ratios, and especially when you're converting things, and you have to make sure that it's not a conversion that would not work. And for example, somebody did one for me one time that was about baking, and they were doing the cooking Celsius. The recipe was for Celsius, and they wanted it to be a simple ratio to show what that would be in Fahrenheit. And unfortunately, the Celsius and Fahrenheit scales don't work that way. They require a calculus equation. It's a simple calculus equation, but it's still calculus, which is certainly above the level of what we do. So it was funny, because if you actually use the simple ratio that they thought it was, the cake would be burnt. Just saying.
Jane, if you give somebody the formula, what does that do to the complexity level?
Well, if you give them the formula, that certainly takes away it from being a calculus, but how much is the formula, what is the formula requiring them to do? Do they have to multiply within a bracket and then divide and add and subtract? Like, you have to look at what are the different computations involved with that. But yes, if you give somebody a formula, like if you give them a volume formula, then you've certainly made it much easier. But it's still involving, they still have to do, the multiplying of each one to get the cubic feet. Or in some case, I think one person gave me one that was inches, and then they had to convert it to feet, which does really increase the complexity, because you have to know to divide those numbers first by the amount of feet. You can't do it afterwards because it won't work. I hate cubic feet. I hate geometry. I'm just saying. So if you really want to confound me, do a geometry question and see how happy I'll be.
So really that echoes the second bullet point here, which is operations or computations, as you said, that require sequential steps, where, gee, I got to do this operation, then this one, then this one, which, as you mentioned, often will involve sort of brackets, do the operation and within the brackets, so it's not that we can't do those with learners, but we've got to be cognizant of how complex and are we rushing into that complexity? Are we conscious of that complexity? And is it appropriate for the task set, the pathway, and the sort of range of learners that you're working with? So again, it's slowing down, being conscious, so that you can more quickly do these in the future. And obviously, as they say, if it involves sequential tasks, it makes it more difficult. Because you're depending on one operation to then be used, the answer to the one operation to be then used in the next calculation. If the answer, the last bullet point, requires some transformation, which again, Jane was just referencing, you were talking about, Jane, inches to feet, and here's some other examples of, where you're converting things, and it becomes more complicated. So be conscious that you're ratcheting up the complexity when you're doing that. So some tips for numeracy. And certainly if somebody's really keen on reading a much longer document, notice the reference at the bottom of the slide, assessing the complexity of literacy tasks. This is where the numeracy task points were taken from. It's a very long document, and it's academically written, but certainly if you want to delve into sort of the complexity behind the IELTS and complexity in different tasks, whether they're literacy or numeracy or whatever, that'll give you more than enough sort of in-depth information. So you can Google that. It's available from the federal government. Okay. Handout time. Get your exercise number 4. There should be 2. There should be the document and the worksheet in exercise 4. So if you can get those out, we're going to do exercise 4. And this one talks about rewriting tasks, and there's a authentic document associated with it, which is all about quick setting ultra plan M20. So I hope you have both of those, both the worksheet and the authentic document that goes with it. It says, I don't know how to say that, MAPEI or it's MAPEI, Ultra Plan M20, quick setting, self-leveling, concrete topping, and underlayment. I never heard of that word, underlayment. Boy, you learn something new every day. So I'd like you to take, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is take a look at the wording of the tasks, 1 to 5 on the worksheet, and I'd like you to reword them. And because this is clearly for an employment pathway, I'd like you to reword them so they're more to the employment pathway. That try to improve the wording that they have used for these tasks. And here's the answers to those. And certainly you may have a slight variation on your wording, but here's sort of what ideally it is. So for number 1, the issue from the original wording we had, it was a fairly long-winded actually question. So the amount of information in the task makes it more complex than necessary. The answer mode is appropriate for the task. So they certainly asked, which symbol is used to show the instruction for water cleanup. So they're narrowing it down. They reworded it and said, let's clean this up. We don't need all that background information. Circle the symbol used to show water cleanup. So getting more to the point. Number 2, why would a tile setter install a correctly located test area? The problem was with the original wording was they used you instead of the title of the worker. So there was nothing wrong with the question. It was pulling out the word you because we want to make it from the worker's point of view and put in tile setter. Okay. The next one, there was revisions to number 3. The original was, would the tile setter be able to install ceramic tile 5 hours from applying the project? This is a yes-no answer. And remember I was saying let's avoid those yes-no answers. That doesn't really take as much to sort of answer those type of questions. So the revision suggested as it's set here is, give them a start time. So if the product's applied at 8:30, what time can the tile setter install ceramic tile, which again is more authentic to the workplace. It's more likely that that's something that he or she would be doing. Oh, okay, I finally got all this product down around 8:30, now when can I plan my next step, which is applying the tile. Number 4, give a reason for using this product on the floors of a major shopping mall. So the original one said, give a reason for using it on the floors in Metrotown, and unless you've been, shopping in the Vancouver area, Metrotown's probably the biggest mall they have in the greater Vancouver area, but, why should you know that? That requires background information, and the point is you're talking about a major shopping mall. So, we don't need to use a particular name of a particular mall. And it also then, if you use a particular name, you're really promoting that business, and that may not be appropriate. And then last but not least, in number 5, list 3 uses for the product. As it was worded, which was, what are some of the ways the tile setter can use the product? How about the ways he can use it? Well, there you've got 2 questions going, and they aren't specific. Think about the handout, question words, and Tori. Remember what was the most difficult for learners to answer and most complex? So here they've reworded it to be more specific. List 3 uses for the product. And I've used this format several times myself in creating tasks. It allows people to locate information, several pieces of information in fact, cycle, and come up with an answer. So it's a good sort of medium complexity question. Anybody have questions or comments about that activity? How did your sort of rewordings compare to what was suggested?
I haven't had any comments pop up on our question box, but I would like to announce that Canada has won the game 3-1.
Yay! Clapping hands.
Of course we have.
Of course we have. I don't know. We were playing Norway. They have a pretty good team.
Yeah, but people have been getting, have you heard that, I think I heard an American broadcaster that was like, really, Canada? Do you have to be, like, winning everything and that nice?
Aw, poor American broadcaster.
Short answer, yes.
Yeah. That was our Olympic moment. If anybody else wants to offer some Olympic moments, we're happy to pause for them. That's great.
So one comment that has come up is in the example that was given, there are actually 2 questions that are there, and comment was, could we split that and do it like questions 5 and 6, have it split into 2 separate questions?
Yeah, that's another alternative you could have done with that. Either way, putting sort of 2 questions in one, is distracting and is more convoluted and complex than it needs to be. And even with the wording that they've used, I'd probably change the question words to, again, make them more specific. Let's be clear about what we're asking the learner. What is the response? So knowing what answer, you have to think about when you're creating tasks, you have to think about and know the answer that you're after. This is why we often say, and I know we mentioned in webinar 1, and we'll certainly mention it again, having someone else, once you draft your tasks, task set, get a colleague, a student, somebody, at least a colleague, to try to answer your questions. Have you worded your questions so that they're getting at the response or the answer that you thought you're trying to search for or create a question around? So you've got to be as conscious of what the answer is as much as the question wording. So having somebody try it out will give you right away, oh gee, that was too vague. They gave me a completely different answer to what I thought I was intending to get. So remember, it's that given information and response requested. Okay. Anything else, Karen?
Nope. No other comments.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to move on to samples. I'm going to hand it over to Jane. We've sent you, sorry, I've got 6 on my, I thought I corrected all my slides. It's 5, not 6. My apologies for my lead typo. We sent you out 5 tasks, and Jane's going to go over why they're good or not so good. So please get those out.
Okie dokie. Now, I think I'm going to start with the not so good example. And that would be the Lego building instructions, folks. And it's the whole point of this one. I think that we have to look at that the concept is the person is supposed to be building an object from Lego and then writing instructions on how to build that yourself for somebody else to do. And here's the problem. I don't know where this is authentic to anything. That's my problem, is that I know that as you look at this, the cover sheet sits there and it was talking about reading text, and I think it was about communication. Now, I'm sure we have all done that or heard of somebody doing that communication type test that you've done with 2 people. You have to have a partner and you're back to back, and at first there's like a line and a triangle and a circle on a page, and you have to say to the other tell the other person how to draw it. And then you look at their drawing and it usually looks a mess. And then the second time around, the other person gets another drawing with simple geometric shapes on it and tells you how to draw it, but you're allowed to ask questions, and that shows how that can improve things. So I'm thinking it might have come from something like that, but this one there was nothing I could make authentic out of it. Like, I will sometimes look at certain task sets and go, yeah, it may not be authentic as it is. Like we saw those tasks that we had for the MAPEI thing that you just did, and some of those tasks weren't authentic, but you can make them authentic. This one, it was just the whole concept. I really cannot see a use. It could be great skill building activities if you want. I think it's just pretty high level because I don't know about you, but if I had to pull out a bag of Lego and make something and then explain to everybody in writing how to do that, I'm pretty sure I would get a lot of different looking buildings because it takes an awful lot to write clear directions and instructions. Or, you know, all of us would be able to be experts at putting IKEA furniture together. So hopefully that makes sense. That would be why that one just didn't fit in. I couldn't figure out an independence goal or any other goal path that really that fit into and that I could make it work. And I just couldn't see the point of it. Maybe somebody else could, but it was really hard, and that's one of the biggest things. I think that you just have to kind of look at that it just doesn't fit in, and the person also thought that it should fit into all the pathways, and I'm going, no, it doesn't. I think that we have to really look at where the task can be authentic, period. You don't always need to actually have a document in front of you. Most of the time, that's going to be the best way to do it and the easiest way to do it, folks, but you can have scenarios that are out there that you create a scenario. I'm sorry, Ann, but I just made that create thing. But a scenario that's authentic to a situation. And in that case, I was thinking about like writing a memo. You need to give them what are they writing the memo about. So you need to give them like a scenario around the memo. And then they create a memo. But it has to be something that's authentic to the actual situation. Hopefully people can get why that one didn't really work so well.
Well, and as you say, Jane, the scenario it's anchored to an authentic sort of scenario or situation, shall we say, that happens on the job, in the classroom, in real life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, this was hard because we actually started off with, both Ann and I had started off doing all of this, and Cindy Davidson was another person that was involved in that, where we were trained on doing workplace or employment tasks. So to get our heads around trying to do it for other goal paths took a while, and it's still sometimes a stretch. But the very first one I ran into that somebody gave me was the CAT preparation test. And I have to say, I was at first going, oh my gosh, no. And then I realized, yeah, that is authentic. Even though it doesn't follow any of the normal authentic rules that we've got, a multiple choice test is something that people are going to have to do when they're going through the secondary school credits, post-secondary, and apprenticeship. They're going to be taking tests like this, and that's very authentic to the situation. So it actually worked out to be authentic for them to go through and do something like this kind of test. So even keeping those kind of things in mind, even though it may not be authentic to real life, and so for independence and employment, not going to fit, but for the other paths it is. Mm-hmm. And so it was a hard one for us to, once again, to get our heads around until we went, oh, yeah, it does fit.
Okay, one question that we just had
so
pop up.
Assuming we haven't had any comments? Yes.
Yeah, we just had a comment pop up asking, how would you rate this task for the purposes of CAMS? What would be the dominant activity?
Which one?
The comment just popped up, so I'm going to say the prep test.
Then?
Yeah.
Well, it's based on numeracy, so I would go with the numeracy angle. I would assume that you're going to go with the highest one, right? So I would go with 3.2 if you're going to put it in like that. That would be mine. Right? Always, for me, I would always go with the highest one, but you have to look at, in that capacity, you also have to look at what your learner's doing. Is there an area that they're really only functioning at level 1s? So in that case, work at the level 1s first and pull out the other ones. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and they just said, where's 3.2 on the sheet?
Under the level indicators on the cover sheet. C 3.2, Use measures to make one-step calculations.
Oh, okay. She just said she's looking at the Lego sheet, which I know we didn't go into as much
But
detail
the
on.
Lego sheet, there is nothing you're going to be putting in there because you're not going to use that one. Yeah, the Lego sheet would be, once again, I always go with what's the highest level and what are the outcomes that you've got down for that learner. Is it based on a B or an A? What competency are they on? So you really want to focus on that, but if it's, a variety of things, you can put down the 3.2.
Okay. And one of the other questions that popped up was, would you be able to take a moment and give a quick overview for the rationale for the format of the cover sheet? The comment is, it seems packed with detail and adds to the paper accumulation in student files. I know it was between the two of us that the cover sheet was developed, but you
It wasn't actually. I actually narrowed it down from what it was.
Yeah.
It had been created by Karen, the other Karen, right? And we had just eliminated some of the points.
Yeah, I think one of the contractors
actually was longer, folks, if you can believe that. We used to actually also have all the performance descriptors were on the chart in the last page. Here's what I go. Yeah, you know what? It's going to add a piece of paper to your, but it's really not, because you're still going to have that cover sheet of some form on it. And I go with, if that's going in a student file, great. The student file, to be honest, isn't much for the student or myself. I can go back and use it as I need. But for me, it's when you're having your funders come in and look, they love paper. And this is a really good indicator of showing the things that this student just did, right? So you have those level indicators right in the front. It's things that you have to think about it from I look at it from the funder standpoint. For me, they can quickly look. Or, worst case scenario, you get hit by a bus. The next person coming in, taking over that learner, can look at this and go, oh, they've covered all these different level indicators, and then go through, right? We did eliminate a few things on it, but if you think, let's put it this way, they're all in Word, and when you download them, you don't have to use this cover sheet if you don't want to. That's up to you. When they're completed, you don't have to pull it. You can literally take it right off. You don't have to print it and use it. That's something, it's an option and choice. Does that answer?
Yeah.
And Jane,
sorry.
I was just going to say, isn't some of the information on the task cover sheet, also helpful in the searching on the Quill portal?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. We're trying to keep things organized so that when you look at the front page, every task looks the same, so you can look at exactly the right spot. If you're looking at the rationale or the task description, you can go right to that spot on every task set that's on the portal to help decide whether you're going to bother downloading it or not. Okay. And we just had another question pop up. Are these questions being used primarily as assessments prior to milestones?
They're not assessments, folks. Let's put that clear. These are task activities that people do to help build up people towards milestones. That's how I'm looking at them. Is there something else, Karen, that you've heard them being used differently than that?
I haven't heard anything, no.
Yeah. I see this as a good way to prep people. See, a task is a culmination of your skills. So you're going to do those skill building activities, which is, for those of you that have been around for a couple of years, more than a couple of years, have certainly know LBS, the LBS outcomes. What you want to look at is those are your skill building activities. These are proving that you've reached those skill building activities, and then the milestones are the end of a level, right? So you want to make sure these are kind of building up to those things where you can figure out, are they prepped to do this? Can they transfer those skills they're learning to really authentic documents and to real authentic activities? Hopefully that makes it a little clearer.
And I don't know, maybe it was, I mentioned the word assessment a few minutes ago, but what I said it in reference to is when learners do tasks, You can look at what they got right, what they got wrong, to see if there's skill building activities you need to do with that learner. So while I agree with Jane, this isn't an assessment tool per se, but certainly when somebody gets something incorrect, it gives you insight into where are they at with their integrated skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we can give them all the skills building activities in the world, but that doesn't mean they'll ever be able to transfer them. This is yet another way of somebody transferring something into an authentic process. And that's our biggest thing, right? We've run into that for many, many years, is that we gave all these skills to folks, and yet, they left our offices and still couldn't read. So why is that? Because they need to transfer skills.
Okay, so we've just had a couple.
Are there more questions?
Oh, just a couple of comments.
Good Lord, I'm creating more questions.
One person said, we do use this particular learning activity to demonstrate readiness to enter upgrading at college, along with the specific milestones, and they have that agreement with certain colleges. Someone else has said they find these tasks are an excellent way of keeping a student's interest in applying the learned skills and providing practice in a real situation that's ideally directly related to their goal path. And someone else says the conversation we just had really clarifies how they're used in the classroom. So I think we're good to go forward.
Yay! Good comments, folks. That was good. Good. Sometimes you start to go, and when you're talking away on here, you kind of go, I wonder if anybody's getting it or anybody agrees. I hate not having people the ability to have talk and put up their hands. I'm going to go to the bus and train schedule because it's another one that came from the OALCF. And now this was also part of, CLO did a project called Moving Forward that was for people on the independence goal path. And it was quite good because this one was looking at bus schedules, and it was specific bus and train schedules and specific questions. I mean, now interestingly we had the what, but the time comes right after. What time does the train with fewer stops leave Bromley? And now this is obviously specific to a region, but you could even take out and grab a bus schedule from yourself and easily adapt these things within your own region, right? So I could grab a train schedule from Kitchener and do this with it. Or you can use the ones here because that's very similar. Like if you look at the document, it's something that they're going to see. Interestingly enough, it's got a pretty scary look to it in the first place because it's just all these numbers. But it's a good teaching moment for, that 24-hour clock, which why I don't understand, but airplanes and train schedules use it. And, then we all have to, if you're like me, you have to constantly, anything after 12 o'clock has to be subtracted. 12 has to be subtracted so I know exactly what time it really is, because most of us don't have 24-hour watches. But it's a real-life authentic thing that people are going to have to do, and you can see that. This one could even be pulled into for a lot of people that are going into employment that use time clocks. Once again, that 24-hour clock bit, it fits in. Even though it's an independence one, a lot of times people are going to have to use these in different parts of their lives. So that's a good one. And I like the fact that it was very authentic and easily followed, and the tasks were very clear and very precise. So we also pulled out and we went through 2 other different sites that you can get great task sets from too, which eventually we're hoping to have them all moved over into the Quill portal with the OALCF competencies attached to them to make it easier for you to use. But the one that we have here is we have the Glacier windshield repair one, and this came from the Ontario Skills Passport, and they did an essential skills checkup tool there that you can go in, and they had this. What I love about this is there's audio that they get to listen to, so it's a really good oral communication. They also have a website the person goes to look at the frequently asked questions. So instead of just attaching immediately a document, they actually have to go to a website and do it. So you've added that digital technology use, which is a really great thing to add on to this. Once again, their main focus on this one was oral communication, but also finding information. So it translates very well over into the OALCF. And I'm having problems turning the pages here. My fingers won't work. But as you can see, there's audio for each one of them, and those were taped and done. So that was just a nice addition that we don't have quite the same ability to do here. And we have it broken down. It's broken down very much like the Measure Up ones, but it's nice because they went outside the normal reading text, document use, numeracy. That's where we get stuck so many times, is that everybody does reading text, document use, and numeracy type tasks, and yet here's a perfect task about oral communication. So it was quite fun to do these ones. I remember working on them, but they were really good. And I actually, you know what, when you start to do those kind of things, you learn yourself. I didn't know how big the little starburst on your screen had to be before they had to replace your whole windshield until I did that. So, and then the next one was a bartender one that came from SkillPlan, Measure Up website. And it's as simple as, this one is, bartenders use recipes to mix unfamiliar drinks. Look at the recipe book pages. So it's just drink recipes and simple questions about them. So you can even see sometimes how, in some cases, if you ever, I don't know, if you're like me, I have one of those little drink books that tells you how to make all these different drinks. I could have photocopied 3 pages of it, like, you know, put 3 on a page and created my own. But you can see how this is very authentic to the workplace, because somebody who is bartending, they just have to, it's a simple recipe question. But that's how a recipe question should look. In the California iced tea recipe, how much Grand Marnier is needed? Because that's something that a bartender would have to do. They would have to measure out the amount of Grand Marnier, and so on. So once again, it's looking at the fact that these are, usually they start with simpler questions. As you can see, the ones from SkillPlan are very nicely laid out that they build, right? Because they start with very simple level 1 tasks, move into a level 2 task named 3 garnishes, and beside each drink titles and symbol or symbols, what do these mean? So now you've put it into a level 3, high 2, 3. So it's once again building on those tasks. That's what's nice about this one, is you can use this kind of as a template of seeing how to build up your skills and in the tasks. Is there any more questions about that? Does everybody know how to reach the Ontario Skills Passport portal on that?
Okay, may just put your hands up if you know how to find it.
And there's going to be a link on our very last slide today. We've got a link to Measure Up, Ontario Skills Passport, and the Essential Skills Profiles.
Because it's a great one to be able to go in there, and it's just that it's hard to get to now from the new website, and it's a little buried, but now that we have that link, it's a lot easier to use, and they do go outside of the norm. And that's what I think is important, because I think we probably have, you guys will probably have a lot of demonstrations that you can move over into tasks, but the situation is most of them are not going, they're going to be that reading text, document use, numeracy. And it's nice to go outside of those. And don't forget the problem solving, which I know is not separated out in the OELCF, and you're going to hear my whine. Karen and Ann are sick of listening to me on this one. But problem solving or thinking skills are supposed to be embedded, which of course they should be, but there are times that you do those things separately. They don't always require you to have reading text or do any finding of information. It is the use of your noggin, for lack of a better term. It's like common sense. You know, and I think of that as, I did one for taxi cab drivers where it was literally somebody gets into a car and is driving, and you drive them to their hotel from the airport, and the customer has argued with you that, you know, you took the longest route. How could you avoid this kind of situation in the future? Well, you don't have to be a taxi cab driver to think that up, and there's no document that goes with it. You just think it through. Is there a way to do that? And that would be a problem-solving approach to it. And that's where I kind of look at, that's something that should be separated out, and I do believe it should be added. I think it's missing under the OELCF, and now I will be quiet about that.
Okay, if there's no other comments, we should push on so we can wrap up on time. Karen, is there anything else outstanding there?
No, I think we're good to go forward.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so please refer to your handout, the task writing checklist. I mentioned this earlier in our webinar, and so we're just going to do a summary again of sort of what do you need to in your task writing checklist. That it's obviously that it's authentic. I know we keep saying this, but it really does come back to, is this something that they would do on the job, do in the academic pathway, do in real life? So always double checking on that. Is the wording appropriate to the difficulty level? Have you been careful enough and thoughtful enough about how you've worded your tasks or questions? Do you have a variety of activities? Do you have a combination of question words, not just the same question over and over again? And is it clear and brief? Do the activity set or task set start with more of an orientation, sort of something that brings them into the, we often, Jane and I talk about bringing people into the document. So starting at the top of the document and leading them through, and oftentimes the task set questions go in that order as well, where not exclusively, but most of the time the first question is sort of focused on the first half of the document, and the subsequent questions are looking further into the document. Or they're doing a cycle and integrate, so you've got to look at different parts of the document. So from least to most difficult, that they're independent of one another. In other words, if they get if there's 5 questions and they get question number 2 wrong, it won't make everything else incorrect as well. That the requested response is how the worker or student or person would complete it on the job, in the classroom, or in real life. That the requested response modes are varied, that you're asking them to do different things at different times. Oh, you know what? Went over one. I jumped again. Sorry about that. We did orient. No, sorry. Boy, it's a long afternoon, obviously, for me. The response modes are varied.
Okay, I'm laughing at her over here, guys.
You should. Oh my gosh. Questions requested, open-ended responses versus the yes or no or closed-ended. We avoid any gender or racial bias, written in the active voice, not passive, that the information retains authenticity. Here we go. So, time to do a little quiz, if you would. So the first question is a true or false. There are 3 parts of a question, and the 3 parts are tasks or questions, purpose or instructional focus, and authentic document or scenario. Are those the 3 parts to a question? True or false?
Okay, we're at 76%, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And you know what, Anne? We've got an exact 50-50 split.
It's true. The 3 parts of a question are the tasks or questions, the purpose or instructional focus, and the authentic document or scenario. Those are the 3 parts of creating questions. So that one's true. Okay, using your question box, what I'd like people to do is name one of the 3 easiest types of questions. I'll give you a hint. Remember the handout, question words and Tori? So name one of the 3 easiest question words. So please type them in the question screen.
Okay, we've got a few answers that have come in. We've got a number of whos. We have a where. We have a when, a how much, a who, when, where, why, or who, when, where, how. There's a what, another how many. So I think that's probably just about everybody.
Okay. The 3 easiest, when is close, but technically it's the 4th easiest. The 3 at the bottom of the question, words, and Tory, so people were right on. How much, where, and who. They were on as the 3 easiest in the question, words, and Tory handout. When was the next one up, so that's, you know, if we were asking for the 4 easiest, that one would have counted. So good. So people are really clear. Oh, did somebody say what? I can hear Jane. Okay.
She can hear me yelling from my office. Yeah, somebody did say what, that's the surprising one.
And
because that's the most difficult.
Exactly. That's the most challenging. Look back at your question, words, and Tory, because it can indicate so many things. That's why what is most complicated, is it can be a little too ambiguous. But we'll talk about how you can narrow that in our next webinar. How can you use what but be more specific? Use partner words. Okay, wording of the task, number 3, should. So you're going to choose which is the correct answer, A, B, or C. Wording of tasks should: A, avoid gender, localized jargon, active voice. B or C? Which one is the correct sentence for the good wording of tasks?
All right, we're at 82%, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we had 6% chose A, 75% chose B, and 19% chose C.
The correct answer is B. Use active voice, use words that match the level of the task, avoid yes or no questions. In A, the first 2 things, well, actually, avoid gender was correct. I'm looking at number A. But you're to avoid localized jargon and use active voice, not the other way around. With B, with C, the reason why it's incorrect is use yes or no questions. No, we don't want to use yes or no questions, but we certainly want to avoid racial stereotypes and avoid the passive voice. So a little bit of incorrect in A and C. B was the correct answer. So that's great. That's great. Most people are on track. Okay. Here's a reminder of other resources we were mentioning earlier about, the Ontario Skills Passport. Here's a link to that one. As Jane said, it's somewhat varied now in the EDU website, but it is there, and there's really great stuff on it. Same with Measure Up. Certainly, you can go there. Tons and tons of tasks on the Measure Up website that you can use, mostly workplace focus. And then, of course, the Essential Skills Profiles. And if you're dying to visit the Employment and Social Development Canada to look at more essential skills tools, they're on that website. So thanks, everybody. Just a final reminder of getting your ideas in for your final task set. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next Thursday.
Wait, I would just like to add in, folks, if you're having problems getting authentic documents that you wanted to use, you can use any of the documents off the Ontario Skills Passport or the Measure Up website as your documents if you choose to do so, because they already have the rights to be used.
Oh, good idea. Thanks, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day and happy Family Day.